You know those neighborhoods where everything looks like it belongs on the cover of a magazine? Perfect lawns, cheerful mailboxes, neighbors who wave like they actually mean it. That was our street. I worked hard to fit into that picture. Fresh flowers on the porch, the smell of cinnamon drifting from my kitchen, polite laughs at book club. And Andrew, well, he was the star. Charming, thoughtful, always the first to help carry groceries or volunteer for community events. People looked at us and said, "You two are so lucky." I used to believe them. But here's the thing. Perfection has a funny way of hiding cracks. I felt them, even if I never admitted it out loud. Nights when his touch felt like a stranger's. Conversations that went nowhere. I'd drown those whispers in to-do lists and errands, baking for neighbors, pretending I belonged in that flawless little bubble. Until one quiet Sunday, while looking for tax documents on his laptop, I found the truth. And it didn't just crack my world, it shattered it. There they were. Message after message, hundreds of them, piling up like wreckage. Women I knew, women I'd smiled at, shared recipes with, clinked wine glasses with at neighborhood mixers. Their words weren't whispers, they were fireworks of secrets, photos, plans. My heart slammed in my chest, like it was trying to escape. My mouth went dry. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or throw up. All I knew was nothing would ever be the same again. And here's the strangest part. I didn't cry. Not then. Something cold and sharp settled over me, steadier than rage, clearer than heartbreak. I closed the laptop slowly, like sealing away a bomb, and I just sat there, staring at nothing, but already thinking. So you wanted to be adored by everyone? I thought. My pulse slowed. My breath evened out. Fine, let's give you the spotlight. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the neighborhood outside, sprinklers turning on, a dog barking in the distance, the world carrying on like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had shifted. My body felt heavy, but my mind was electric, racing with thoughts I couldn't quiet. There was no room for tears, no space for self-pity. Just a dull ache behind my eyes and one clear, sharp thought. He humiliated me in silence. I'd answer in public. I thought about all the times I'd covered for him. The late meetings, the distracted smiles, the half-hearted apologies for missed dinners. I'd woven excuses around him like a protective blanket, keeping up appearances, shielding his image. But what had he done for me? He'd stripped me of dignity without a second thought, all while shaking hands and flashing that practiced grin. The weight of that realization sat in my chest like a stone. I wasn't going to carry that weight alone anymore. I got out of bed and padded quietly to the kitchen. The tile was cold under my bare feet, grounding me. I made a cup of tea I never touched, just holding the warm mug, staring out the window at the peaceful street. The very street that would soon buzz with whispers and judgment, but not toward me. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to power. Not anger, not revenge for revenge's sake, but the certainty that I deserved better than silent suffering. He wanted attention. He was about to get all of it. I could already picture it. The shock, the disbelief, the whispers traveling faster than wildfire. Every doorstep, every mailbox, every windshield, all of them holding the truth he thought he could bury. I didn't just want him exposed. I wanted every single person who smiled at him to know exactly who they were dealing with. And so, in that dark, quiet kitchen, I made my first decision. If he wanted to play the perfect husband, I'd show them just how perfect he really was. The next morning, the world looked the same, but I didn't. I smiled when Andrew kissed my cheek on his way out the door, oblivious as ever. His cologne lingered in the hallway, that familiar scent that used to comfort me. Now it felt almost absurd. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at his empty coffee cup and thought, how many lies could one man pour into a life before it overflowed? My hands itched for action. But this had to be precise. Careful, calculated. I spent the day gathering it all, every screenshot, every date, every smug little message he thought would stay hidden. My fingers trembled as I clicked through, but I kept going. Each detail felt like a wound reopening, but I needed them. Proof. Evidence. His words, in black and white, laid bare for the world. There was a strange satisfaction in organizing it all, like reclaiming a little piece of control, one document at a time. By evening, I had a folder that could burn down an entire facade. And still, I hesitated for a moment. Not because I doubted whether he deserved it, I knew he did. But because once I set this in motion, there was no turning back. Our lives, our carefully curated image, would never survive this. But maybe that was the point. I looked out the window again, the perfect street, the perfect families, all built on secrets they thought no one could see. I wasn't the only one living with a mask. Maybe it was time someone tore them all off. So I opened my laptop, created a plan, and started preparing. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to make sure every single doorstep carried the weight of his lies. And if I was going to expose him, I was going to do it in a way no one would ever forget. I didn't waste time. The moment Andrew left for work the next morning, I sat down at the dining room table with my laptop and a printer humming beside me. Each click, each sheet sliding out warm and crisp, felt like another stitch in a tapestry of truth. I labeled everything: dates, times, screenshots with his phone number right there in bold. No excuses, no room for doubt. The paper stack grew higher, and with it, a strange sense of calm, almost like I was taking deep, measured breaths after years of suffocating. The house smelled like ink and paper, mixed with the faint sweetness of last night's flowers on the counter. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips as I smoothed each page, making sure there were no smudges, no mistakes. I wanted every word to land like a punch. I thought about all the women, not just the ones he'd texted, but the ones who'd watched him hold my hand in public, believing the same lie I had. They deserved to see what I'd seen. They deserved the truth, even if it burned. I sealed each envelope slowly, methodically, like folding up secrets too heavy to carry anymore. And with every envelope, I whispered in my head, "Here, see him for who he really is." I wasn't just exposing him. I was setting something free. In me, in all of us who'd been fooled, silenced, made to feel small. The weight on my chest had started to lift, replaced by adrenaline and purpose. My hands no longer trembled. They worked with quiet certainty, steady and sure. By mid-afternoon, my kitchen table was covered in neat stacks, each one identical. White envelopes, no drama, just plain and simple. The kind of simplicity that would hit harder than any angry outburst. I wrote one single note to slip inside each envelope. The truth about Andrew. Thought you should know. No signature, no explanation. Just truth, sealed and ready to land on every doorstep like a quiet, unstoppable storm. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I packed the envelopes into boxes, each one heavier than the last, not just in weight, but in meaning. The room felt hushed, like even the walls were holding their breath. I could almost hear the echo of Andrew's laughter from past dinner parties, bouncing off the silence. But tonight wouldn't be filled with laughter. Tonight, I was going to make sure the truth whispered through every crack in this perfect little neighborhood. I knew I couldn't do it alone. This wasn't a job for hurried hands and shaky nerves, so I made one more call. A delivery service, discreet and efficient, no questions asked. I explained what I needed: every car windshield, every mailbox, every doorstep. They didn't care about the contents, just addresses and instructions. But when I hung up, I caught myself smiling. Small, almost involuntary. This wasn't just revenge, this was art. Every detail, every move, perfectly choreographed. While I waited for them to arrive, I looked around my kitchen. The soft tick of the clock, the faint scent of lavender from the candle I'd lit out of habit. Everything looked normal. So painfully normal. I wondered how long it had all looked that way while falling apart beneath the surface. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching shadows stretch across manicured lawns. Tomorrow morning, those same lawns would be littered with uncomfortable truths. And I would be right here, watching it all unfold. The doorbell rang softly. My heart jumped, but not out of fear, out of anticipation. I opened the door to two men in dark uniforms. We didn't exchange pleasantries, just business. I handed over the boxes and the simple instructions I'd printed out with the same care as the evidence itself. As they loaded the boxes into the van, I felt lighter, almost giddy. I closed the door quietly behind me, leaned against it, and whispered, "Let's see how perfect they all feel tomorrow." I barely slept that night, not because of nerves, but because my mind was alive, sharp, humming, electric. I kept imagining the moment those envelopes would be found, the early risers stepping out in slippers, bending down to pick up their morning paper, and discovering so much more. The quiet ones checking their mailboxes before coffee, expecting bills or catalogs, but finding Andrew instead. His secrets, printed and folded with care, delivered straight to their front doors like a gift they never asked for. At one point, I stood by the window, watching the delivery van cruise slowly down the street. They moved with precision, slipping envelopes under wipers, tucking them between door handles. The night air felt cool against my skin, filled with the faint scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. And in that stillness, I felt something unexpected. Peace. No regrets, no second thoughts, just the sweet silence before the storm. I whispered to myself, "It's out of my hands now." And for the first time in months, maybe years, I meant it. As dawn crept in, painting the sky in soft grays and pale blues, I finally lay down. My body ached, my heart felt tired, but I knew sleep wouldn't come easy. I kept picturing the ripple effect, whispers over fences, text messages pinging in rapid bursts, women waking up to answers they didn't know they needed. And Andrew. I imagined him walking out the front door, unsuspecting, stepping into the aftermath of his own creation. The thought made me smile. Not a wicked smile, a satisfied one. I closed my eyes for just a moment, listening to the birds beginning their morning songs. Life moving forward, oblivious to the chaos waiting just around the corner. And before sleep finally tugged at me, one thought lingered. Tomorrow, everyone will know. Every doorstep, every mailbox, every heart. Touched by the truth I carried alone for far too long. And I wouldn't have to say a single word. The morning hit like a match to dry leaves. I woke to the sound of notifications, phone buzzing, message after message lighting up my screen, but I didn't reach for it. Instead, I walked slowly to the window, parting the curtains just enough to watch the show unfold. The street, so pristine and quiet the night before, was alive with motion. Neighbors standing on driveways, clutching envelopes, hands on hips, eyes wide. Some gesturing wildly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. It was happening. I could almost hear the whispers floating on the breeze, carried from porch to porch like wildfire. Text alerts pinged in rapid succession, group chats I used to be part of, now bursting at the seams. I imagined screenshots being sent back and forth, voices raised in kitchens all around me, wives holding evidence, husbands stammering, friendships strained, trust cracked open. And all I had to do was stand here, watching from behind the safety of sheer curtains, my heart steady, my breathing slow. Andrew's car pulled into the driveway just as the first wave of chaos crested. He stepped out, his usual confident swagger faltering when he saw the clusters of neighbors outside. Conversations hushed the moment he appeared. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. He glanced around, his smile flickering, confused, then wary. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it, and I saw it. The exact moment his face paled, the color draining like water swirling down a drain. My chest tightened, but not with guilt, with satisfaction. He looked up at the house, his eyes locked on the window where I stood, half hidden. For a second, I thought he might storm inside, but instead, he turned away, walking slowly toward one of the groups on the sidewalk. I watched as he tried to speak, hands gesturing, that polished charm slipping like wet soap. They didn't buy it. Not for a second. I couldn't hear their words, but their faces said everything. Disgust, amusement, contempt. He was finally on display, exactly the way he deserved. I watched him fumble through excuses, his hands moving faster, his voice rising. I didn't need to hear the words to know the rhythm of denial, the forced laughter, the pleading eyes, the half-hearted attempts to twist reality. But these people weren't his audience anymore. They were judges. And his charm, that golden mask he wore so effortlessly, was crumbling by the second. One woman actually laughed. A short, bitter sound that cut right through him. He stood frozen for a moment, blinking like he'd been slapped. He spun on his heel and stormed up the front steps, yanking the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. I stood in the kitchen, waiting. His footsteps thundered toward me. He stopped short when he saw me, calm, collected, still in my robe with a warm cup of coffee in hand. His face was flushed, his breath ragged. "What did you do?" he hissed. His voice cracked at the edges, desperate and furious. I took a slow sip, the warmth spreading through me, and set the cup down. I didn't yell, I didn't flinch. I just handed him the small card I'd written days before, the one line that summed it all up. "You wanted them all. Now you have them." He stared at it, his hands trembling, jaw clenched so tight I could see the vein in his neck pulsing. For a second, I thought he might explode, throw something, scream until the walls shook. But instead, he crumpled the note in his fist, spun around, and stormed out the door again. The front door slammed shut like a thunderclap. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The house was quiet again, but outside the noise grew. Conversations rising, doors opening and closing, cars pulling in and out of driveways. The storm I'd unleashed was swirling all around us, and Andrew was caught right in the center. I stood at the window once more, coffee in hand, watching him try to outrun consequences he never thought would catch up. And deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning. He ran from house to house, knocking on doors that didn't open. The ones that did. Well, they greeted him with cold stares and tight-lipped smiles. I watched him plead, gesture, even laugh nervously, trying to pull off that same tired act, the misunderstood good guy caught in a mistake. But the more he talked, the more ridiculous he looked. I saw one neighbor fold his arms and shake his head slowly, almost pitying him. Another woman closed her door mid-sentence, leaving Andrew talking to no one. My phone kept buzzing on the counter. Messages from friends, acquaintances, people I hadn't heard from in months. Some were shocked, others angry, a few suspiciously silent. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The story was writing itself now, carried by whispers and screenshots, passed from phone to phone like wildfire. And as much as part of me wanted to read every word, I knew it was better to sit back and let it burn on its own. It was out there, unstoppable. By late afternoon, he came back through the door, drenched in sweat, shirt wrinkled and untucked, the picture of a man undone. His bravado was gone. All that was left was rage and panic simmering beneath the surface. He pointed at me, shaking, his voice hoarse. "You've ruined me." I met his stare and, for the first time in years, I didn't feel small under it. I felt tall, steady. I didn't say a word. Just turned, walked toward the living room, and let him sit with the weight of it all. I knew what was coming next. Threats, legal talk, empty promises of retaliation. He wouldn't go down quietly. Men like him never do. But as he sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, surrounded by silence louder than any shouting match, I felt it in my bones. He wasn't the one in control anymore. The community had turned, the walls were closing in, and just as I was about to step out of the room, there was a knock at the door. I turned toward the front door, heart beating slower than I thought it should. I expected Andrew to explode again, to rush past me and answer it himself, but he stayed frozen at the kitchen table, head in his hands, breathing uneven. His silence spoke volumes. He'd run out of performances. I crossed the room, each step echoing softly on the hardwood, and placed my hand on the doorknob. Behind me, the house felt heavy, suffocating almost, like it was holding its breath along with us. When I opened the door, I braced for confrontation. Maybe angry neighbors, maybe more accusations hurled my way. But it wasn't anger that met me, it was 3 women. I knew them all. One from yoga class, one who'd sat across from me at countless PTA meetings, and one I'd exchanged recipes with at a neighborhood potluck just weeks ago. Their faces weren't hard or bitter. They were soft, understanding. There was relief in their eyes, and something else I hadn't expected. Gratitude. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, words caught somewhere between apology and explanation. But before I could speak, the one in the middle, Stephanie, the yoga instructor, reached out and gently took my hand. "You've freed us too," she said quietly. Her voice trembled just enough to let me know how heavy it had been for her too. The other two nodded, eyes shining, not with tears of sadness, but release. We stood there in silence, connected by something stronger than betrayal. Shared survival. They stepped inside, uninvited but welcome, and I closed the door behind them. Andrew didn't even lift his head. Maybe he knew. Maybe he understood in that moment that this wasn't just about him anymore. We sat around the kitchen table, the same table where I'd printed those screenshots, where I'd planned every detail, and they told me everything. Their stories, their doubts, the moments they'd second-guessed themselves, thinking they were the problem. And now, sitting here together, none of us felt small. As each of them spoke, I realized how similar our stories were. Different details, different moments, but the same pattern. Small lies that grew into something monstrous, gaslighting that made us question reality, apologies that sounded rehearsed but we forced ourselves to believe. They shared moments I recognized all too well. The empty text replies, the sudden changes in routine, the feeling of being loved just enough to stay, but never enough to feel safe. We'd all lived in versions of the same prison. Stephanie reached into her bag and pulled out a folded flyer. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Women who expose liars." I blinked, reading it twice, unsure if I was dreaming. "We started this last month," she said, her voice steady now. "But no one knew how to make it loud. Until you." I felt my breath catch. I hadn't just blown up one man's facade. I'd lit the fuse on something bigger. They'd taken my quiet act of defiance and turned it into a movement. The other two, Claire and Julia, chimed in, their voices stronger with each word. They told me about the women reaching out, sharing stories that had stayed hidden for years. Stories of deceit, manipulation, betrayal, and silence. Until now. Claire placed her hand on mine, her grip warm and firm. "You didn't destroy something, Lena. You built something." My eyes stung, and for the first time since this all began, I felt tears threatening. But not from sadness. From overwhelming, unexpected hope. We sat there for hours, planning, dreaming, connecting the dots between our lives and those of strangers who would soon feel less alone. The noise outside faded, the chaos dulled to background static. Inside that kitchen, there was only purpose. I realized I hadn't just exposed Andrew. I'd cracked open a door for hundreds of women who thought they had to stay quiet. And as the sun set outside, Stephanie smiled and said, "This isn't over, Lena. It's only just beginning." Later that night, after the house had quieted and the women had left with hugs and whispered promises to keep building this thing, I sat alone in the kitchen. The same table, now cleared, felt like sacred ground. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't panic that filled me. It was curiosity. I picked it up and opened my messages. Screenshots of the flyers were already circulating online. Women in other cities, other states, were asking how to join. The story wasn't local anymore. It was growing legs, stretching far beyond our perfect little neighborhood. Andrew hadn't come home. Part of me wondered where he was, hiding, denying, unraveling. But I didn't care enough to ask. His name was everywhere now, trending on social media. The man exposed by his own wife, and the women who turned it into a movement. Headlines scrolled across my screen, articles popping up faster than I could open them, news anchors discussing it on national television, faces I didn't know smiling into cameras, telling versions of my story with pride. I sat back, letting it wash over me. The weight I'd carried for so long, secrecy, shame, exhaustion, was gone. Replaced by something brighter, stronger. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was revolution. The texts pouring in weren't whispers of gossip. They were thank yous. Women telling me their stories, their fears, their hopes. And every single one ended with the same line, "You gave me courage." My heart ached in the best way, stretched wide and full and overwhelmed by the impact I hadn't even imagined. I turned off my phone and stepped outside. The air was cool, the street finally silent. I looked up at the night sky, stars scattered like confetti, and I whispered to myself, this was never just about him. I could feel it deep in my bones. This wasn't an ending. It was the start of something bigger than any of us. And somewhere out there, women I'd never meet were standing a little taller, speaking a little louder, all because one secret landed on their doorstep. The following week felt like stepping into someone else's life. My inbox overflowed with invitations, interviews, podcasts, speaking engagements. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to become that woman, the one everyone pointed to, whispered about. But then I thought of Stephanie, Claire, Julia, and all the women I'd never meet whose voices were finally being heard. How could I turn away from that? So I said yes, to all of it. And each time I spoke, the fear faded a little more, replaced by purpose. Standing on stages, I looked out at faces that mirrored my own, tired, hopeful, scared, and brave all at once. I told them what I'd learned the hard way. Silence protects the wrong people. Secrets only rot in the dark. And sometimes, you have to risk burning down the facade to find freedom on the other side. The applause was humbling, but it was the tears in their eyes that stayed with me. They weren't clapping for a story of revenge. They were clapping for themselves. Andrew's world collapsed faster than I could have predicted. His business partners distanced themselves. Social invitations dried up overnight. I heard whispers of canceled contracts, frozen accounts, desperate attempts to salvage what couldn't be saved. But I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. Watching him struggle to explain away the inexcusable wasn't satisfying. It was sad. The kind of sadness that comes from knowing someone had every chance to do right and chose not to. His consequences belonged to him now. Meanwhile, my life filled with women who weren't just survivors, they were warriors. The foundation we built grew faster than I could keep up with, spreading across cities, gaining momentum, inspiring marches, online campaigns, real change. What started as one envelope on one doorstep had become thousands of voices shouting in unison, "We will not be quiet." And somewhere deep inside, I knew. This was the victory I never knew I needed. I still caught glimpses of Andrew's name sometimes, buried in headlines, attached to cautionary tales, a symbol of what happens when arrogance collides with accountability. But I no longer flinched. His story wasn't mine to carry anymore. People would point, they'd whisper, but not about me. They'd talk about him, about what he'd lost, about how quickly someone revered can fall when the truth catches up. And every time I heard his name, it reminded me of the power we hold when we stop being silent. The foundation became more than I ever imagined. We built resources for women who doubted their own instincts, spaces where they could ask questions without fear, and tools to help them uncover what they suspected but couldn't yet prove. I met women whose stories made mine feel small, women who stayed too long, who feared too much, who thought they had nowhere to go. And each time they found the courage to leave, to expose, to reclaim their lives, I felt part of something larger than just revenge. I felt part of a revolution. I found joy in the small moments again. A quiet morning coffee without tension simmering beneath the surface. Laughing without second-guessing myself. Walking down the same street where it all began, not with shame, but with my head held high. People smiled at me differently now, not with pity or curiosity, but with respect. Some even stopped to thank me. I never knew what to say. I just smiled back, feeling that strange warmth in my chest, knowing they understood more than words could express. The night before my biggest speaking event, I sat alone on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. My heart felt full in a way it never had before. I whispered to the quiet night, I thought this was about exposing one man. And then I smiled to myself, the kind of smile that comes from deep understanding. Turns out, it was about empowering thousands. The day of the conference arrived and I stood backstage, palms slightly damp, heart pounding with that familiar cocktail of nerves and excitement. The room beyond the curtain was filled, women of all ages, all backgrounds, gathered for one reason, truth. The announcer called my name, and I took a breath so deep it felt like inhaling years of silence and exhaling freedom. I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding, the warmth of the spotlight wrapping around me like a promise. I spoke from the heart, not from a script, not from polished notes, just truth. I told them about betrayal, yes, but more importantly, I told them about what comes after. The strength you find when you think you have none left. The beauty in burning down what's false so you can build something real. I saw nods, tears, laughter. Not for me, but with me. Women who had lived their own versions of my story, standing taller with every word. It didn't feel like a speech. It felt like a conversation we'd all been waiting to have. When I finished, the applause rolled through the room like thunder, but it wasn't the clapping that got me. It was what happened next. As I stepped off the stage, they were there. Stephanie, Claire, Julia, waiting, smiling, eyes shining with pride. We hugged, not as victims, not even as survivors, but as women who had chosen to rise. I looked around and saw more than just an audience. I saw a movement, a sea of voices that would never be silenced again. I thought back to that quiet kitchen table, the weight of those envelopes, the fear of what would happen next. And now, standing in that room, surrounded by strength, by unity, by hope, I finally understood. This was never about one man or one betrayal. This was about all of us. About the power of truth. About what happens when you stop whispering and start shouting. I smiled and thought, we are never going back.